Good evening. My name is Beth Bennett. I'm the Executive Director of the Wisconsin Newspaper Association. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Hall of Fame induction ceremony. It's been a long time since we've all been together, and it's really nice to be back together again in person. We just finished our Board of Directors meetings this afternoon, and all of us realized that the last time we were together was here at the Madison Club 2 years ago in November. And who would have ever imagined that that we would have waited this long to see one another again. So this is truly is a celebration on many fronts. I'd like to acknowledge tonight before we start the selection committee for the Hall of Fame. Carol O'Leary, who is not with us this evening, Dave Zwiefel, and Bill Barr. Both Dave and Bill are here, so thank you. And I would like to thank our supporting organizations for supporting the event this evening. Before we start our dinner, we're going to give a tribute to a real friend of ours. And I feel very privileged to be able to do this evening. I'd like to take a moment to remember an exceptionally good friend of the Wisconsin Newspaper Association and the Wisconsin newspaper industry, Bob Wills. Bob passed away earlier this year after having left an indelible mark on journalism and those who were lucky enough to have collaborated with him or to have called him friends. I first met Bob in 2010 when he attended the WNA Trees for Tomorrow retreat in Eagle River. From that initial meeting, we became fast friends, and it was helped by the fact that we shared a common link. Bob and I were both from small coal mining towns in central Illinois. My hometown is about an hour south of Colfax, Illinois, where Bob was born and raised. Over the years, we had many conversations about small towns, small town living, small town newspapers. My family owns a group of community papers in central Illinois, and how wonderful life was growing up in a small town in the Midwest. After leaving the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, where at the time of his retirement, he served as vice president of Journal-Sentinel, Inc., Bob retired to a home up north that is located near the Trees for Tomorrow campus in Eagle River. In recent years, he spent the winter months here in Madison. Being in Madison made it possible for the WNA staff to get to know Bob better and to hear directly from him about his convictions and his many professional accomplishments. Being in Madison also allowed Bob to attend WNA events like the Hall of Fame. Many of you probably saw him at I think 2 or 3 years ago at one of our last in-person events. Bob is a member of our Hall of Fame, and he was able to attend the annual conventions and the awards banquets. It was wonderful to have him with us, to join us for events, and to observe how others enjoyed his presence. Unfortunately, I wasn't around when Bob made his mark as an outstanding newspaper journalist, editor, and executive for the Milwaukee Sentinel and Journal. I didn't get to see the fearless pursuit of freedom of information causes and relentless coverage of local government news. The stories are legendary about what a great writer and tough editor he was. But during that time, I was fortunate to spend with him. I got to appreciate the kind of man he was. I got to see how those small town underpinnings provided a foundation for his belief that people matter and that their government should function to serve them. That conviction led him to found the Wisconsin Freedom of Information Council in 1979. And I got to see how those small town roots never left him. Bob cared deeply for people, regardless of their background and persuasion. Bob continued to write a personal column until his death at age 95. And much of his subject matter was about ordinary people, life in Wisconsin, and the beauty of the outdoors. He wrote with conviction and passion, and he wrote with humor. We all loved his dry sense of humor. He saw joy in ordinary things. When Bob died, he asked that Trees for Tomorrow be included in a short list of causes to which people could contribute in support of things that mattered to him. He loved trees, and he felt at home with all the weekly publishers and editors that attended every year. My time with Bob was brief, but it was nonetheless special. I'm honored to be here tonight to pay tribute to an incredibly special man, someone so many of us were fortunate to call our friend. With that, enjoy your dinner.
Well, welcome back, everybody. Isn't it great to see real people and not have a Zoom meeting and actually have human flesh? Yay! This is exciting for me. One of the things that Beth and I were talking about a little bit ago, she was at the Mike Mathis's funeral, which was a sad occasion, but it kind of made me realize how important all of us are to the world around us. We kind of get in our own worlds where we're focused so much on getting the paper out and doing what we need to do, but we forget about how integral our papers are to the communities we serve. And she was at Mike Mathis's, and of course Mike was a personality that was bigger than this room. He was incredible, but she was at his funeral and it was just packed with people. And it was just a sign of how important Mike and the Kiel Tri-County Record and how important that was to the community that he served. And it's one of those things we kind of forget in the process, and so much has changed about the industry that we're in, but how integral and how important and how really woven together were the newspaper and the communities we served. And so I just think about, as we're saluting the people here who are part of the the Hall of Fame that we're talking about, but how important they are to not just journalism, but to the communities we serve. And it's really important. I look at Bob Wills, who, when I was a way younger person than I am today, in the 70s, when I was a freelancer at the Milwaukee Sentinel, and Bob Wills was like the god, sort of above everyone else, and he was incredibly. He was just very esteemed. And to see him later in life, when he was in his 90s, at Trees for Tomorrow, which is something, if you haven't got a chance to do, please go to that, the pylon ceremony, the Trees for Tomorrow. It's really kind of what's cool about the Wisconsin Newspaper Association and what makes it special. It's really unlike anything else, and it's like, if you get a chance to do it, and hopefully with us resuming normalcy, we'll get a chance to do that again. I hope you all, if you have an opportunity, please go there. It's a great retreat. It's way up north in Eagle River, and but it's a chance to kind of reconnect with how newspapers, how important they were to the community and to the world we are around us. But Bob was there, and even in his 90s, he was still, surprisingly sharp and surprisingly just so connected and so, he just knew what was going on in the world in journalism. And his son, I hope I've got this right, but I think he was working for Bloomington or something like that, or Bloomberg, for financial publications in China, and he was there taking care of his dad, and he was there at this meet, and it's just like you're just seeing this guy who was like somebody I respected, and he was in his 90s and certainly not the same as he once was, but just still like so sharp and so connected and so really wanting to make journalism better. And it was just really a neat thing to see. And so this is why we're all here, because we're here because journalism matters. I got my San Martino's here. I got my Journalism Matters mask. I'll wear it, but it really does matter. But what really matters is how important we are to the community, and that really says a lot about what we're about here today. I'm not going to get to introduce her and all that, but I was lucky to work with Meg Jones, and she was, really such a cool, a person who really was a journalist through and through, and somebody I just highly respected, and yet had no level of ego or somebody who thought she was better than anybody else. She was just such a great reporter, great journalist, and just a great colleague to work with. And it's just really neat that we're saluting people like that in our community. It's really what's neat. So, let's begin with the first person on our list today. That is Helen and Harlan Ingridsen. The Ingridsen family is certainly, that is a family that has great legacy and great history in our community. And I'm going to introduce, if everything goes okay, do I do the video first, Julia? Julia has magically signaled the video to begin.
Harlan and Helen Ingridsen set the foundation for a strong weekly newspaper through their devotion to journalism and their community. Helen attended business school in her home state of South Dakota, and then in Chillicothe, Missouri, where she graduated from business college. After graduating, she was hired as a secretary at Ace Buick in Madison, a role she quickly excelled in. Harlan Ingridsen graduated from Sparta High School before heading to Washington, D.C., where he worked at the U.S. Housing Authority, and attended George Washington University at night. He eventually returned to his home state, where he earned a degree in economics from UW-Madison. He was interested in the newspaper industry and set out to learn more about it. After working in roles from ad salesman to linotype operator, he purchased the Deerfield Independent in 1947. Harlan and Helen first met while attending a local soapbox derby. They married in 1949, and together they purchased the Edgerton Reporter in 1951. Quickly, they built it into one of the most respected and award-winning weeklies in the state. The couple had 2 daughters, Diane and Carol, and continued to operate the family farm while devoting themselves to the newspaper and public service, changing the fabric of their community for the better. Nearly 2 decades after purchasing the newspaper, Harlan was elected to the Wisconsin State Assembly. As his public service role grew, Helen devoted herself to building the newspaper, serving as boots on the ground. The newspaper excelled, winning several state and national accolades. In the Assembly, Harlan was a tireless advocate for rural Wisconsin, family farmers, and the state's small businesses. Upon his death in 1992, he was hailed by the Capital Times as a champion of the people. Helen continued to run the paper alongside her daughter, Diane. She maintained a leadership role even in the final years of her life. She also remained passionate about the Edgerton community, helping create the Sterling North Book and Film Festival, and saving the community's struggling tobacco heritage days. Although Helen stopped driving to the newsroom at the age of 92, she continued to contribute from home, remaining involved in the newspaper until her death in 2017 at the age of 98.
I think they asked me to come up here because I'm the only guy old enough to remember Harlan. The first time I met him was in a field on his farm where he was driving a tractor. I was a kid reporter sent to interview the Edgerton newspaper man who had decided to run for a seat in the state assembly. It seemed odd at the time. I fully expected to meet him at the newspaper office at downtown Ingridsen. But the reporter had gone to press, and there was work to do on the farm. And since it was getting close to the fall and the upcoming harvest season, there was no time to waste. From the get-go, Harlan struck me as one of the most down-to-earth people that I've ever had the privilege of getting to know. As we said in an editorial, as you just saw many years later, when he passed away in the fall of 1992, Harlan was truly a champion of the people. He spent his entire life being that champion. I came to know him best for his 6 terms in the state legislature, where he advocated for the state's farmers and the small businesses that served them. He was a key player in getting the Farmland Preservation Act passed in Wisconsin and helping the University of Wisconsin establish a veterinarian school, known today as one of the best in the country. It was all an extension, after all, of what he was as a newspaper man. When he and Helen bought the Reporter in 1951, He fashioned the newspaper into an award-winning weekly, one of the best in the state, by serving the community as only a weekly newspaper can do. He and Helen directed covers that highlighted and promoted the interested community, involving the paper in many of the community celebrations, and being the leader in making them successful. A graduate of Sparta High School, he started in his business shortly after college, where he got a degree in economics from the UW. In 1947, Harlan got a job as a news editor for the weekly Waupaca Post, a job, as he put it, that he could handle because I could run the linotype and the press. A year later, he bought the Deerfield Independent, and shortly after, the Edgerton Reporter. He was successful because he never forgot his roots. He knew his subscribers, he knew what made his community tick, and he also knew that the newspaper needed to be a leader, that editorial positions could tackle problems and ignite needed change. You would be surprised, I'm sure, how things have changed in this business, not always for the better, but he sent a message how important community journalism is. He would also be surprised at how the legislature in which he served as a part-time public servant for 6 terms has evolved into a partisan sideshow. He and Helen got their daughters involved in the newspaper business when they were little girls. And so today, Diane, along with her sister Carol, have kept their dad and mother's newspaper in spirit alive and well. That's their legacy, and I'm so happy we decided to honor them here tonight. Thank you.
First, I want to thank Dave because you've made Madison and Wisconsin better every day. Sometimes better than we wanted you to. That's another story. So good evening, I'm James Steinbach, and I'm a TV guy. I know that sounds a bit like a 12-step program for recovering broadcasters, but where's my teleprompter? I don't know how to speak. Anyhow, I'm a TV guy, but we get the State Journal every morning because we know there are 4 essential things necessary for life: air, water, food, and your local paper. and coffee, so that's 5. So communities and their papers support each other. They support each other, they strengthen each other, they build each other. And that brings me to the matter at hand, Helen Ingridsen. So Harlan and Helen were quite a team, and when Diane joined them at the paper, get out of the way, I didn't know Harlan, but I knew Helen, and I loved her. Who could not? I planned on telling you some of Helen's story, but the video covered a lot of it, so I'll just add a few things, because it's a great American story. She was born in a sod hut in South Dakota, rode a horse to her one-room school. She goes to business college, and in the Depression, she figures that she'll have a better chance in a city than where she was. So she moves to Milwaukee, doesn't have any luck there, but she lands a job in Madison at Ace Buick, which I think is Zimbrick now, because she is a ferocious typist, and she has a great smile. So when World War II begins, companies start making planes and tanks instead of cars, but Helen's boss gets her a job running a car dealership in Hibbing. Now, you have to understand that Helen was 22 years old. And this is traditionally a man's job, but that was Helen. So Hibbing is really cold. You probably know that. Fast forward a few years, and Helen's back in Madison at Ace Buick. And one fine day, she goes to a soapbox derby, as you've heard, and she meets Harlan. And as Diane says, it was a case of a woman chasing a man until he catches her. Absolutely, Helen. So Harlan had always wanted to run a newspaper, and in 1951, after they were married, they bought the Edgerton Reporter. Now Helen is managing the paper, running the family farm, raising 2 daughters, and so of course Harlan decides to run for the legislature. Why not? So it's more work for Helen. Not that she ever begrudged it. She supported Harlan every step of the way, just as she did Carol and Diane. She was tireless. And as Diane says, Dad didn't make any money until Mom got in the business. Dad had vision and could write, but Mom kept the wheels on. And here's the important part. My mother could make a penny scream. It's perfect. So Helen made things happen. She loved Edgerton, and she made sure the city came alive in the paper. She and Harlan were active philanthropists, not just money, she worked at it. She sold the most roses for the Rotary Mother's Day event, the most golf registrations. That's all Helen. She loved the reporter. She believed in facts, not alternative facts, just plain old facts. Diane tells a story about someone, could have been the mayor, don't remember, coming in to complain about some reporting, and Helen says, "Do you think we just make this stuff up?" So I'm going to quote Dave Zweifel, who said, "I don't think I've ever known a more dedicated newspaper person than Helen. She and Harlan represented the absolute best in our business." Helen also loved to dance. And I'm proud to say that I played a small role in this. I used to run public television, and on Saturday evenings, we had the Lawrence Welk Show. And every Saturday evening, Diane and Helen and Carol would clear the living room floor, remove the furniture, roll up the rugs, and dance. And when someone, this was almost always a young person, or younger than me, would ask me why we still broadcast Lawrence Welk, I would say, well, for Helen, of course. Lawrence Welk is still on public TV, by the way, and somewhere Helen is dancing. God bless her.
This is a testament to how women are secretly running the world, but nobody really wants to admit to it. So I think that's her parents, and this is true with Diane as well, and Carol as well. So congratulations, and in honor of your parents, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We are so honored to have this testament to our parents, Harlan and Helen. And I'd like to mention one thing. My parents made it possible for me to be very involved with the National Newspaper Association as well as the Wisconsin Newspaper Association. And I was on the board for 10 years. And in that capacity, I had the opportunity to be president. And I got the chance to travel all over, and I saw successful businesses, not so successful businesses. And when I got home, I realized that two of the most finest newspaper people were my very own parents. And it was just unbelievable to me, their dedication to journalism ethics, the belief in public service, and knowing that to build a community, also to build your newspaper. So we're very proud to be here with you all. We feel like you're all family to us. And I'd like to just mention a couple of the people who are with us tonight. My cousin, would you stand up when I mention you? My cousin Shirley and her husband George. And now they're actual family to us. And all the rest of the ones who are friends, we also feel are part of our family. There's Bob Lang and Jonathan Berry, and you met James already, and his wife Christina, and Ann Herdendorf, and Helen Solander, and her partner Dick, and Janice Redford, and San Martino. Do I have you all? But anyway, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Oh, we also want to thank the WNA for all of the wonderful arrangements. Thank you.
I'd like to announce
Thank you.
our third inductee, Bill Hale.
Through his mentorship, Bill Hale inspired success among dozens of individuals working in the newspaper industry. A Missouri native, he attended Westminster College and later earned his master's degree in journalism from the University of Missouri. After college, he ran the Pleasant Hill Missouri Times, which received state and national recognition during his tenure. Bill moved to Wisconsin in 1984 and purchased the Grant County Herald Independent. He built the company on a foundation of strong relationships with local businesses. He was an active member of the community and was a founding member of the Lancaster Community Foundation. He went on to buy the Boscobel Dial, the Crawford County Independent in Gays Mills, the Fenimore Times, and the Tri-County Press in Cuba City. During his career, he was known for always being generous with his time, especially when it came to helping his peers. Once, with a volunteer group, he traveled to Ukraine to help 2 fledgling newspapers. He was skilled in all aspects of operating a community newspaper, committed to journalism, and dedicated to the industry. Beyond his day-to-day duties, he also was active in the Wisconsin Newspaper Association and the International Society of Weekly Newspaper Editors. In 2002, Bill sold his newspaper group to Morris Newspapers Corporation before moving to Florida. He died in 2020 following a long battle with cancer, but remained passionate about newspapering until the end.
I'd like to introduce our next speaker, John Ingridsen, publisher of the Morris Newspaper Corporation of Wisconsin and member of the W&A Board of Directors, to say a few words about Bill. I hope he still has those star glasses that he can wear coming out there. Those are pretty groovy.
Had some really good speeches tonight. They're hard to follow. Can you hear? So I want to thank the Wisconsin Newspaper Hall of Fame Committee for selecting Bill for such a prestigious honor. He's one of my Hall of Fame people as well. And I wouldn't be standing here right now, having spent the last 36 years in the newspaper industry, without him. He deserved to be recognized for his life and his time as a newspaper publisher, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity to speak on his behalf. Bill was my boss for 17 years, but more than that, he was a friend, a father figure, a mentor, and a patient teacher. In many ways, he was more like a doting parent than a boss. He had his unwavering belief in the sky is the limit for me. And if you haven't had the experience of having a boss who felt that strongly in you, I'm sorry to say you missed out. It's been 19 years since Bill ran a group of 5 weekly newspapers and 2 shoppers in southwestern Wisconsin. But I think of him often, and while I'm not one to look back much and instead focus on the future, the late 1980s, 90s, and the early 2000s have been on my mind since learning of his induction. So let me take you back to 1984 when Bill, his wife Diana, and 7-year-old son Andrew moved to Lancaster from Missouri. He called it Missouri. Bill had been publisher of the Pleasant Hill Times weekly newspaper for 8 years prior to relocating to Lancaster. He had visited Lancaster to explore the market, and he marveled at the manicured lawns, the well-kept homes, and as he drove into the heart of the city, there was a county courthouse with a copper dome in the middle of the square. There were no empty storefronts. He understood that a county seat community is good for business, and he so too was a vital downtown business community. He passed the hospital on his way to the square, and that was another check mark for what he wanted in a community for a weekly newspaper. 1 year and 1 month later, I joined the Grant County Herald Independent in November 1985 as a sports reporter. By then, Bill's ex-wife and son had moved to Seattle, Washington, and while his son would visit in the summers, Bill was a single 45-year-old man with no roots to this area. He could have easily bailed and gone back south rather than stay in a place that warms up slowly to foreigners. Instead, he put a flag in the ground and went about carving out what would be a very successful operation. This was a time when there were still many small single ownership papers, and acquisitions and consolidations were not nearly as common as they are today. In his 18 years in Lancaster, he added the Tri-County Press in Cuba City, and later the Roundup Shopper there, the Fenimore Times, the Boscobel Dial, the Crawford County Independent and Kickapoo Scout, and the Montfort Register. He waited out a competitive shopper in Lancaster, and when the owner retired, he picked that up as well. Any publisher who has acquired newspapers knows that the transition is not a walk in the park. It can be messy and it is time consuming. There are new staff who are apprehensive about what this means to them. There are different billing and circulation programs to figure out. There are building and equipment considerations that can require an investment of time and money. Bill did all this without retaining any publishers with any of the purchases. So he was really all alone on this. He had the support of his mother, Corrine, who lived well into her 90s, but he was an only child, so he had no siblings to bounce things off of, and his father had passed when Bill was in his 30s. His mom was a school teacher, and his dad was a successful advertising salesman. Bill had the teacher gene in him, and he certainly knew how to close a deal, so he had the best of both parents. He was extremely well-read, graduating with an English major, and later a master's in journalism from the University of Missouri. Bill spent several years in New York in the advertising field before deciding to use his talents in the newspaper industry, and he returned to the small community in Pleasant Hill, Missouri, about 20 minutes from where he grew up in Holden. In the 5 years after he hired me, he made 3 other hires that were pivotal to his future. He hired 19-year-old Phil Minge to work on the presses in the back shop. Phil would eventually become his head pressman. A year later, he hired 20-year-old Kevin Kelly, who would eventually become his sales manager. And 2 years later, he hired 21-year-old Gloria Landon, who would eventually become his billing clerk for several of his papers. For those current publishers who are grumbling about not being able to find good help right now, take note of Bill's approach. None of the 4 of us had sent in a resume, and none of us were looking for a job at the Herald Independent. I was a cold call. Bill heard I was a recent graduate who did well in English in high school. That was my older brother. And was good at sports. That was me. So not having any weekly sports reporting skills other than procrastinating, I was asked to join the team. He learned about people before he interviewed them. Not having lived in southwestern Wisconsin, Bill didn't know the people in the area, but he asked others to help him make connections. Who are his parents? What can you tell me about him? Would she be a good fit here? He met Phil in a bar and was impressed by his energy and his ability to mix with all types of people. He didn't have a position open, but he offered him a job to apprentice under 2 older pressmen that he knew wouldn't be around much longer. Kevin came into our commercial printing site to get his resume printed off so he could go out looking for jobs in the area. Bill asked him to come back to his office, and the 2 had an impromptu interview. Bill asked me about Kevin at lunch that day and offered him a job the next day. Again, like Phil, there was no current position open when he hired Kevin. Gloria he had talked to about a graphic design position which she knew nothing about. And when he asked her to design an ad, she said the day ended horribly. 5 or 6 months later, a position opened up in billing and circulation. Gloria had taken courses at Southwest Tech for office management, and this time when he came back to her, it was a better fit. She laughs about being in a tank top and shorts when he knocked on her door, offering her a position. The only question he asked her was when could she start? All 4 of us have spent more than 30 years with the paper. Bill fostered development, he encouraged growth through seminars, conferences, and conventions. He provided patient and measured guidance, and he never judged us by our worst mistakes. Instead, he measured us all by our potential. He would take road trips with Phil to printing operations around the state, and the two would go to inland and NNA conventions in Chicago. We all suspected it was more for a day and night of good food and drink. Bill loved nothing more than a great steak, a smooth scotch, and a night of fun conversation. While building a staff that was more like family to him than employees, he set about making a name for himself in the community, served on several committees, from the Chamber of Commerce to the Library Board, and eventually he was an inaugural member of the Community Foundation Board. He offered me some great advice when I took over for him as publisher of the group in 2002. He said, make sure to serve on a committee with the Newspaper Association in Madison. You'll get to know so many publishers and have that connection that will be good for you. He was right about that. He also said to find the bar at the conventions and have conversations outside the scheduled seminars. He said I would learn more from that. Again, it was very good advice. He had done the same thing during his publishership, and he developed friendships with young and up-and-coming publishers like Andrew Johnson and Bill Haupt. Andrew said he considers Bill a mentor and has told me several times that Bill offered him some good advice when he needed it during his early years in the business. I'm not surprised. That was who Bill was. He invited Executive Director Sandra George for a boat ride on the Mississippi River and later got to know Sandra's replacement, the Silver Fox, as he called him, Peter Fox. Later on, he would take a trip with other publishers in Wisconsin to Europe and got to know Carol O'Leary. Bill loved to travel, and he had strong connections with foreign exchange students from Uruguay and Germany who had lived with him for a semester, who would remain like family to him. While Bill was an only child, he didn't lead a solitary life. He preferred the company of others and kept a full calendar even after retiring. I suspect he might not have retired at the age of 60 had he not suffered an aortic aneurysm 2 years earlier that he thought was going to take his life. He'd been going to Florida every spring for 3 months for 5 years, leaving the running of the paper to me. And he figured he had better get to a life beyond the humming of the presses and the crunch of the weekly deadlines. So he sold the papers in 2002 to Charles Morris of Morris Multimedia in Savannah, Georgia. Charles, like Bill, still believes in the printed word, and at 83 is still actively overseeing his company. Bill made a good decision then, and he enjoyed his time in Clearwater, Florida for the next 18 years, and felt blessed for every year he had to live after his health incident. One of our former salespeople, Brian Muldoon, who Bill hired at the age of 19 in 1999, said that Bill had a huge belief in people, and that made Brian work harder and still does today. To all of us who worked for Bill, we say thank you. To those here today, please raise your glasses and share a toast to Bill with me.
John Ingridsen, who you've just heard, is accepting this award on behalf of Bill's daughter-in-law and granddaughter who couldn't attend the ceremony. I didn't know Bill well, but I know John well, and I can tell that he's quite a good person, and that's all I need to know about Bill. He's quite a legacy he's left behind, so thanks so much. Our fourth inductee is Phil Haslinger.
Phil Haslinger has advocated for underrepresented communities his entire career. Before venturing into journalism, Phil considered becoming a Catholic priest and spent 2 years at seminary before moving to Madison in 1969 to attend the University of Wisconsin. He earned his bachelor's degree in sociology and his master's in journalism. During that time, when presidential candidates were frequenting Madison, he reported for the Daily Cardinal. His work with the student newspaper led to a position with the Capital Times, which he joined in 1973 as a reporter covering politics, education, and religion. He quickly moved up the ranks to city editor, editorial page editor, managing editor, and associate editor. Phil wrote about racial disparity in schools, issues surrounding age, like the importance of full disclosure when it comes to a presidential candidate's health status, challenges among the Catholic Church, racism, and the importance of providing shelter to the homeless. During his time as the editorial page editor for the Cap Times, the newspaper became the first in the nation to endorse the Reverend Jesse Jackson for president in 1988. He mentored dozens of young journalists and didn't hesitate to send them out to investigate important issues like housing discrimination, political corruption, and environmental catastrophes. He made a point to prioritize training for Cap Times journalists and frequently connected local students with writing and journalism resources. In 1993, Phil was elected to the National Conference of Editorial Writers and helped bring their convention to Madison several years later. He served as the group's president in 2002. He retired from the Cap Times in 2008, but continues to advocate on behalf of the journalism industry and inclusive communities. He does it through his work as a minister and advocate, and in his role as a member of the board of the UW-Madison Center for Journalism Ethics.
First of all, did everyone see that went by that said the last day of the typewriter? Did anybody else see that little line at the bottom there? That is, many of us can remember the last day of the typewriter, so that's pretty amazing. But I'd like to introduce Kathy Culver, the Jane T. Burgess Chair in Journalism Ethics, an associate professor in the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Journalism and Mass Communication, and director of the Center for Journalism Ethics.
Hi, thank you so much. I am not going to repeat all the things that were in this lovely video and in this bio, because I was taught early on to be concise and not repetitive. So I'm going to allow you to read all of this, but I will say the photo featured with Phil's bio is not of him in the seminary. Sorry, Julia.
I know.
Those fact errors cost 10 points in my class, but we'll forgive you because everything else is just blissful. So rather than going through biographical information, I want to share a few things about Phil. Phil is kind, Phil cares deeply, and Phil is a bridge builder. There have been many times that I have needed counsel, and Phil and I meet up at the Oasis Cafe in lovely Fitchburg, Wisconsin, just south of here, and we have agenda items for the Center for Journalism Ethics. We get there about 90 minutes after we start because Phil is counseling me and helping me, and we're sharing stories of our families who are ever important to us. Phil also cares deeply, particularly about racial and social justice. It's something that he lives to his very core and has just made tremendous contributions, not only in the Madison community, but in the region and indeed nationally. It's something that informs and inspires a lot of his work with the Center for Journalism Ethics. By the way, mark your calendars, April 29th, we will be having our annual conference on inequity and journalism. And then Phil builds bridges. There is not a time I can recall in our years of working together that he has not led me or one of our student fellows or even a journalist to better and more inclusive journalism, to representing this community as it is in all of its glory and all of its less than glory. We recently had a situation where a reporter, who shall go unnamed, did an absolutely remarkable story about the impact of COVID on this community, featuring entirely white sources, almost all male. And I contacted him and I said, I'm sure you're getting your bell rung on social media and via email right now. And he said, I sure am, and it wasn't for lack of trying. And I said, you know who you need to meet? Phil Haslinger, because he will help you diversify the sources in your reporting. And of course, Phil responded to the introduction with a litany of suggestions, and that reporter was so incredibly grateful. So I am pleased to introduce a phenomenal journalist, great editor, really transformative minister and community leader, but most importantly to me, my very, very dear and trusted friend, Phil Haslinger.
First, thanks to Katie for that, not only that beautiful introduction, but also for the nomination for this. I'm really honored to be receiving this. Also, thanks to Paul Fanlund, editor and publisher of the Cap Times, and Cap Times Associate Editor John Nichols, one of the best hires I ever made, for writing supporting letters for my nomination. And thanks to the Cap Times people who are here. This doesn't, I get to stand up here and look like I'm important. But at the Cap Times, it's the whole team of people who make the paper what it is. And so from Dave leading over many years as the editor, Paul now, all the crew that's here, thank you so much for being who you are and helping make the paper what it is. And then, thanks to my best beloved, Ellen Reuter. She grew up with the Capital Times in her home, and then cheered me on, put up with the Barneveld tornado in 1984, blowing me out of our apartment for the last month before our son was born. She thought she was marrying Clark Kent, and she wound up being a minister's wife. And thanks to the WNA for adding me not only to the distinguished roster of Wisconsin journalists, including Elliot Marinus, the man who hired me, and Dave Zwiefel, who was my immediate boss throughout this career, but also including me in this class of 2021. When I told a friend I was going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, he asked if this meant my rookie card would increase in value. I'm not sure a press card ever has a lot of value, but here it is, my rookie card from the Daily Cardinal in 1971-72. 50 years ago, I never would have imagined that I would be standing here tonight joining some of Wisconsin's stellar journalists. I had sort of an awkward beginning my first year at the Cap Times. Yes, I got to cover Paul Soglund's first election as mayor of Madison, the first of many and many and many. But later in the year, in November, Elliot took me along to interview Governor Patrick Lucey on the 10th anniversary of President Kennedy's assassination. Lucey had been very close to the Kennedy family, and he told some good stories, and I dutifully recorded all of them on my tape recorder, and then went back to the office and discovered to my horror that the governor sounded a lot like Donald Duck. Fortunately, I'd also taken notes, and I quickly constructed a story with a lot of paraphrases. All of us had been through a lot of technological change over the past half century. When I was in journalism school, I had a chance to learn how to use one of the first cathode ray tubes, CRTs, and that taught me how to work on a computer. And when they came to the Cap Times in 1975, I learned a lot in journalism school. And Katie, I learned some other things besides that. That wasn't all. But 20 years later, in 1995, I helped create this new thing called a website for the Cap Times. And I was so proud of that, this became my personalized license plate, TCT Cyber. I'm someone who's really comfortable doing things online, but I still love holding a newspaper in my hands. One of the things I took great pleasure in at the Cap Times is going down to the press room and watching the press start up, increasing its pace like a spaceship taking off. And then once I got to have that classic moment of saying, "Stop the presses." It was on March 30th of 1981 when President Reagan was shot. I was the city editor at the time, and our final edition had just gone to press, and the presses had just started rolling when the news came in. I asked Dave Zwiefel, who was then the managing editor, if we should stop the press, and he said yes. So I picked up the phone and called the press room and said, "Stop the press, the president has been shot." You don't get those moments very often. One other press room story. This is just a secret among us here, okay? It was fun to go down to the lower level of the press and ride on the skateboard-like carts for the rolls of newsprint.
I don't think that was improved behavior, but it was fun. As you well know, there's a lot more to this business than technology and fun with the presses. We're in an area where we get labeled enemies of the people. So sometimes I wear this t-shirt with pride, journalism matters, hashtag not the enemy. Last month, the Nobel Peace Prize went to 2 journalists, one from Russia, the other from the Philippines. This is the first time a journalist has been so honored since 1935, and only the 3rd time in the history of the Nobel Prizes. One of those winners is the amazing Maria Ressa from the Philippines, and she said this to Time magazine in October when they interviewed her after the prize was announced. It's a battle for facts. We're at the front line, and it's gotten more dangerous than it has been in the past. I think that also shows the role of journalists in fixing this, and fixing the mess that we're in right now. Without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. How can you have a democracy without that? This is the fabric that holds us together. That's one of the biggest challenges for us in the world of journalism right now, but it's not the only one. All of you know the economic perils right now in the news business, and you know about the basic skepticism that many readers over the years have for us, in part because of the way politicians sow the seeds of distrust, but also in part because we can fall short of what we hope to be. One of the strengths of good journalism, though, is that when we fall short, we publicly correct our mistakes. So let me offer a few thoughts on why I have hope in the future of journalism as it evolves to meet the challenges of a new era. Let's start with a documentary that was on PBS Wisconsin this past Monday. It's called simply Storm Lake, and it was about the community newspaper in that Northwest Iowa community. It received recognition when its editor, Art Cullen, won the Pulitzer Prize for editorial writing in 2017. While its editorials are powerful, something I surely appreciate, it's also a window into the life of the community, while, as Maria Ressa said, getting at the facts that lead to the truth, that leads to trust, and undergirds democracy. We see that here tonight in the work over the decades of the Edgerton Reporter, where Harlan and Hale and Ingridsen spent decades providing a voice and a watchdog for their community, a role their daughter Diane maintains so well now. And I did not know Bill Hale, but his work in southwest Wisconsin surely stands in that tradition as well. There are newspapers all across the nation that are finding ways to meet the challenges of our times. And one of those big challenges, you will not be surprised to hear me say, is the increasing racial and ethnic diversity of our country, and coming to terms with both the good and the bad of our past. I am so glad to be in this class of honorees with J. Anthony Josie. You'll hear more about him in a few minutes, but the fact that in 1916, the year before the Cap Times was founded, he helped start Madison's first black-run newspaper. And he sustained that along with one he started in Milwaukee for a quarter of a century. That is an amazing story. And I'm proud that the early editions of the Cap Times recognized his important role in our community, and that the Cap Times did not shy away from taking on the Ku Klux Klan here in the 1920s, and stood with the civil rights efforts in the 1950s and 1960s, and today it's put a special emphasis on covering the diverse communities and hard racial issues in Madison. I'm glad that during my 3 decades at the Cap Times, I had a chance to continue that tradition of seeking racial justice in our community, and in fits and starts, trying to improve our coverage of the growing diversity in Madison. But of course it was fits and starts. There was a time when I was writing in the spring of 1981 about a local march involving the murder of 20 black children in Atlanta, and I ended quoting someone I described as Bowling Green, president of the Madison NAACP, when Bowling Smith called me the next day. He was not amused by my error or by my ignorance of the local black community. So then we ran one of those very public corrections of the error. I learned not only about double-checking names, but also about the need to spend more time in the black community and getting to know people. And then on October 3rd, 1995, I learned how out of touch I was with some of the undercurrents of feelings among black residents in our community and our country. That was the day that O.J. Simpson was acquitted of murdering his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend, Ronald Goldman. And like most white folks, I was shocked at the verdict. But when the verdict was announced on the TV in our newsroom, one of our copy editors, a stellar black journalist named Linda Lockhart, stood up, raised her arms, and cheered. I was stunned. And then I began to ask, why were our perceptions so different? It seems to me that that's a vital characteristic of what journalism needs to do today, to seek out why people's perspectives are so different. That doesn't mean ignoring the facts or challenging deliberate attempts to mislead the public. But it does mean delving into the ways people's views of the world are shaped and then using the power we have to provide places where, in constructive ways, people can see across the barriers that separate us. There are other signs of hope I see for our profession. I've had a chance to get to know some of the students working at the Center for Journalism Ethics, and I'm continually impressed by the passion and dedication they bring to their work. And the Center for Journalism Ethics itself is helping journalists all across the nation grapple with some of the tough dilemmas in our world today. I'm heartened by some of the new models for local journalism that have emerged. There's the creativity of the Cap Times in adapting over the last decade by becoming primarily a digital news source and then bringing the community together in ways to explore current issues. There are newspapers like the one in Little Rock, Arkansas, and Chattanooga, Tennessee, that are giving subscribers iPads and training them how to use them to replace the printed paper during the week. The Salt Lake City Tribune has switched to nonprofit status. The Philadelphia Inquirer, like the Cap Times, is owned by a foundation. And speaking of the Inquirer, here's another sign of hope. My daughter Julia has just started working for them as the lead newsroom data analyst. Her husband Justin Myers is a data editor for the Associated Press. They are both on the leading edge of one of the ways journalism is changing by delving into how data can enhance stories and engage readers. Now, given my dual status as a journalist and a preacher, I'd like to end with the recent words of one of the world's current great spiritual leaders, Pope Francis. Just last week, he was honoring two longtime journalists who covered the Vatican for several decades. And like all public figures, Pope Francis has faced harsh news coverage at times. Would that others might have this attitude. I also thank you for what you tell us about what goes wrong in the church, for helping us not to sweep it under the carpet, and for the voice you have given to victims of abuse. Thank you for this. But his words that I'd like to leave you with are about what he called our mission as journalists. He said our mission is to work so that the evil in the world may be healed. Our mission, he said, is to explain the world, to make it less obscure, to make those who live in it less afraid, and to look at others with greater awareness and also with more confidence. I'm so honored and grateful to be part of this group this evening and part of a roster of previous Hall of Famers who have done the work of listening, investigating, and reporting to make our communities better places for all. Thank you so very much.
Just want to say, if you look at my little mask here, thanks to San Martino, journalism matters. That goes right along with what he's saying. It does matter, so thank you for all you do. And thank you, Phil, for all you've done to make journalism a better thing and the communities around us better. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thanks. It's now my privilege to bring in Beth Bennett to take on the next part of our program. Beth's the Executive Director of the WNA, who needs no introduction, but I'm giving one anyway, so thank you, Beth.
And now it's time for us to induct Meg Jones into the Wisconsin Newspaper Association Hall of Fame.
Meg Jones was known as the heart and soul of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel newsroom for more than 2 decades. She was born in Rhinelander to Carol and John Walter Jones, a World War II veteran. From an early age, she loved writing, reading, and history, and always wanted to be a journalist. Unlike many children with early career plans, her passion never wavered. Meg went on to attend the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she earned her bachelor's degree in journalism and history. While at the university, she also played drums for the school's renowned marching band, and was a member of the crew team. After graduating, Meg landed her first journalism job at the Marinette Eagle-Star. She would move on to the Shawano Evening Leader and the Wausau Daily Herald before eventually joining the Milwaukee Sentinel, where she remained for the rest of her career. Meg was committed to storytelling, and through her sincerity and natural curiosity, she forged genuine connections with everyone she interviewed. The same touch extended to her colleagues, and to the young interns she mentored and celebrated. Meg was a general assignment reporter who developed an expertise in covering veterans and the military. Over the course of 11 years, she was embedded 8 times in the Middle East. Her passion for covering the troops was evident in her work, and in her ongoing correspondence with the many soldiers and their families who she interviewed over the years. She also authored a book, World War II Milwaukee, which told stories from the home front during the global conflict. Meg was part of a Journal-Sentinel reporting team named a Pulitzer Prize finalist in 2003, and was honored by the Milwaukee Armed Forces Week Committee for her work covering the armed forces. She was named to the Milwaukee Media Hall of Fame in November 2020, and after her death last year from pancreatic cancer, she received a Distinguished Service Award from the UW-Madison School of Journalism and Mass Communication. Her colleagues are still working hard to make sure her legacy is never forgotten. Just last week, they launched the Meg Jones Scholarship Fund, which aims to support the next generation of Wisconsin journalists.
Now I'd like to introduce George Stanley, who will give remarks on behalf of Meg. George is the editor of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. He's the regional editor of the USA Today Network, Wisconsin, and he's a member of the Wisconsin Newspaper Association Board of Directors.
You can see from those pictures, in every single one of them, there's this big smile. And that's Meg Jones in a nutshell. I mean, the joy that she brought to life and to her job was evident every day in that smile. And that's what we all are remembering and actually struggling with the absence of in our newsroom. I was assigned by some of our reporters to write a column about Meg last week because they put together a scholarship fund at the Milwaukee Press Club. And last week was Veterans Day. And Meg was the best military reporter I think we've ever had in the state. And she had this passion for covering Wisconsin troops. And so I wrote a Veterans Day column, and as I was doing the work to write the column, it became evident really early that the best way to tell Meg's story was with her own words, because she was such a beautiful writer, and she is such a profound storyteller about our veterans. So most of the column was excerpts of Meg's own writing. And the response to that was tremendous from our readers and to the press club. So they've already had 137 donations to her scholarship fund for the UW-Madison Journalism Scholarship in her name. From everyone from a general to a nun, sending in their contributions. One of my favorite, they also sent lots of notes. One of my favorite came from a lady named Judy from Amherst, who wrote that Meg's stories, she went to all the links and she read the actual stories, not just the excerpts. And she said that Meg Jones touched my heart deeply. It's so seldom that words are written to bring the stories to you in a heartwarming way. Meg Jones definitely had that gift. And then she talked about how Meg's stories blessed her soul. It was just beautiful. But the best story I heard after the column came out was a new one that I hadn't heard before from an old friend. Bill Jans, great columnist for the Milwaukee Sentinel and the Journal Sentinel for decades. Legendary reporter who worked side by side with Meg for many years. Bill's been retired for a long time now, but he sent me a note about his last letter from Meg. Meg became very close friends with many people in the newsroom, including both Bill and his wife Bernie. And every year, Bill said, she would send them a 5 or 6 page, single-spaced, typewritten letter, just catching up with things and letting them know how things were going with her. The last letter they got was in May 2020, which was about 6 months before Meg got sick and was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. It was the last letter he received. 5 pages in rainbow colors, Bill said. In it, she wrote about her coverage of the awful shootings at Miller Brewery, basketball, Shakespeare, watching 2 people kiss seemingly forever in Paris, Da Vinci, her 3-week trip to the Ukraine with side visits to Paris and London. She wrote about the Bucks playing the Hornets in Paris. As you know, she could do anything, and she wrote a story about the Bucks there and even helped with a video of the press conference. Meg liked to find ways to have her vacations paid for. And she traveled across the world, and she somehow found ways, oh, the Bucks are in Paris. I could do that as a freelancer for you guys, and while I'm on vacation. And not only that, she went to the Pulitzer Center and got her own grant to go and tie it into the trip to Paris, so her flight was paid for and everything, so she could cover Wisconsin troops in the Ukraine. And she tied it all together into one thing. She was brilliant at that, and it was just she just found ways to do the best stories. So as she was telling Bill about that year and all the things she had done, she typed something else into that letter after telling him all the usual types of things. And this is why I'm talking about this tonight, because I think this describes Meg Jones like nothing else. I thought of you last week, Meg wrote, while I was driving my mom's car from Austin, Texas to Oak Creek. I stopped in Oklahoma City to visit the bombing museum and the memorial. It was a beautiful sunny day, probably much like the day of the bombing. And I noticed the trees were just starting to bud, with tiny green leaves not yet unfurled. The memorial in Oklahoma City consists of acres of empty chairs with names on them. Each chair has the name of a victim of the bombing from 1995. They killed 168 people. One of those people was Bill Jans' niece and goddaughter, Robin Huff, who was 7 months pregnant with her first child. I had difficulty finding Robin's chair, Meg wrote. The museum gave me a map, and I found it after I saw all the exhibits. I vividly remember that day. I looked over to see you sitting at your desk, your face a mixture of grief and worry. I sat on Robin's chair, and I read your column out loud, slowly enunciating your heartfelt words. And then Bill ended his note to me saying, who else would look up the story I wrote about my niece, take it along with her 25 years after the bombing, and read it out loud in the midst of all that emptiness? Who else would even think of such a thing? Meg Jones. So Meg's mom, Carol, was going to be here tonight, but she wasn't feeling well. She's in her 80s, and better safe than sorry. So she stayed home, but we will pass this along to her, along with some other great love that we received about Meg. And I'd like to thank you all for honoring her. She's truly, I think, one of the great journalists in the history of Wisconsin. You saw the thing. I went to the University of Wisconsin. A lot of you did. How how is it even possible to be in the marching band under Dave LaCrone where you march forever and work like crazy, be on the national champion crew team, work for the Daily Cardinal, and graduate in 4 years? Yeah, it's not even possible. Only one person could have done it, and that was Meg Jones. So that's what she was, one of a kind. And I really thank you all very much for honoring her tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, George, and thank you for receiving the plaque on behalf of Meg's mom. We're sorry that she couldn't be here with us this evening. As the stewards of the Wisconsin Newspaper Association Hall of Fame, the staff, we felt that it was really important for us to start to look back into our history up to this point. Recipients have been individuals that we've honored moving forward since its founding. And so these final two recipients are individuals that we have identified that we truly believe should be inducted into our Hall of Fame. And I would say to you, when you look at the Hall of Fame and what it means to our industry, take a look at the names, the photos, the names in the program, and see that there are generational connections, and that there are spouses that are in the Hall of Fame. And so it's a very emotional and very personal thing for the association to honor these individuals. So with that, we will induct our next recipient, which is J. Anthony Josie.
Editor of Wisconsin's first successful black newspaper, Jarius Anthony Josie was born on January 6, 1876, in Augusta, Georgia. After completing high school there, he moved to Atlanta, where he co-edited the Atlanta Independent and studied at Atlanta University. In 1905, after graduating, he married Chestina Carmichael, and they moved to Madison, where Josie enrolled in law school and became one of the first African Americans to attend the University of Wisconsin Law School. He launched the Wisconsin Weekly Blade in 1916. It was the first black newspaper in Madison and one of the earliest in the state. As co-editor of the newspaper, Josie took a position on almost every issue of importance to the black community in Madison, and later in Milwaukee. He fought against segregation and discrimination, and played an important role in exposing inequity in Wisconsin and across the country. Josie purchased the Milwaukee Enterprise in 1917 and merged the two papers, becoming the sole editor and publisher of the Wisconsin Enterprise Blade. He moved to Milwaukee years later, where he continued to challenge racial stereotypes in the mainstream press, as well as social and economic discrimination. He championed black businesses and played a pivotal role in several local election campaigns. Josie's reputation as an economic and political force continued to grow, with his influence reaching even the highest level of government. Josie conferred with President Herbert Hoover on racial problems in 1929, and was named to a congressional commission created to erect a national memorial to African Americans. The memorial was never built, and the Great Depression caused the Enterprise Blade to suffer from ever-declining circulation and revenue. The newspaper folded in 1944, but Josie continued to serve his community. He started a real estate business that catered to potential homeowners of color, and won unofficial election as mayor of Bronzeville, a term commonly used to describe the segregated communities of color. When he died 12 years later, 2 funerals were held, one in Madison and another in Milwaukee. A pioneer of Wisconsin's black press, J. Anthony Josie served as an outspoken champion for equal rights and an inspiration for many.
Let's give a round of applause. Our final recipient this evening is Lucius Neiman.
Lucius William Neiman, founder of the Milwaukee Journal, was born in Sauk County, Wisconsin on December 13, 1857. When his father died 2 years after his birth, he was sent to Mugwanago to live with his grandparents. At the age of 13, he left home and school and headed for Waukesha, where he found work as a printer's devil for the Waukesha Freeman. He quickly became fascinated with newspapers. In 1871, after having learned to set type, he got a job in the composing room of the Milwaukee Sentinel. His boss was so impressed with his workmanship, he encouraged him to consider a career in writing. The suggestion prompted him to enroll at Carroll College in Waukesha. During that time, he began writing for the Milwaukee Sentinel, and after a year and a half, left college to accept a reporting job with the newspaper. It wasn't long before he was city editor, and in 1880, he moved to Minnesota for a job as managing editor at the St. Paul Dispatch. Less than 2 years later, he returned to Milwaukee to accept the same position with the Sentinel. But after the newspaper was taken over by Republican Party bosses who he didn't trust, Lucius walked out. He went on to purchase his own paper, the Milwaukee Daily Journal, a struggling 4-page campaign sheet that was less than a month old. In his first issue after taking control, Lucius made his philosophy clear. He wrote, "The journal will be independent and aggressive. It will be the people's paper." He ran the paper from a single desk with just 100 square feet of office space. He was the publisher, editor, circulation manager, and typesetter. Under his leadership, the journal stood up to his initial promise. Recognizing the threat posed by German propaganda during World War I, he employed a special editor to focus on foreign interference and translate propaganda materials. In 1919, these efforts earned the journal the first of 8 Pulitzer Prizes for its strong and courageous campaign for Americanism in a constituency where foreign elements made such a policy hazardous from a business point of view. The journal went on to become the state's largest and most prominent newspaper, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Lucius died in 1935 following a long illness. He had run the newspaper for 53 years. His legacy continues today through the Nieman Foundation for Journalism at Harvard, which was founded in 1938 through a $1.4 million donation by his widow, Agnes Wall Nieman. The foundation aims to promote and elevate the standards of journalism in the United States and educate persons deemed specially qualified for journalism. It is also home of Nieman Reports, a quarterly journal on journalism issues, the Nieman Lab, an effort to investigate sustainable business models for journalism, and Nieman Storyboard, a publication that showcases exceptional narrative journalism.
With our final induction, that concludes the 2021 class of the Wisconsin Newspaper Association Hall of Fame. I want to thank all of you for coming and being with us tonight. And I'm sure that you all feel, whether you're actively involved in the newspaper industry or you're friends of ours who know us and understand people that are involved in the newspaper industry, just how emotional an evening like this is for all of us. So thank you all so very much for coming, and we'll see you next year for our 2022 program. Thanks.